Trump's trade policy have been sort of lots of ups and downs. He's threatened a lot of things, and in the end, he often backtracks. I think with respect to China, for example, he has threatened many, many more things than he has actually ended up doing. The latest tariffs on steel and aluminum, I think, makes no sense from the perspective of the United States. And I'm not so sure that Trump is not going to eventually backtrack. So I don't think we should be so concerned, and that I think the term trade war is probably too extreme for what has happened so far. I think the problem is that Trump needs to show something to his base, and I think he's more interested in saber rattling and appearing like he's doing something. But when push comes to shove, there are a lot of interests in the United States, economic and financial interests, and as well as in his administration, who do not want to raise tariffs, who are not interested in protectionism. My guess is that, as has happened to date, that there will be a way of walking back from these latest tariffs as well. So I'm not that worried. I think the left was caught wrong-footed with this backlash and the rise of populism, in large part because the left had positioned itself, I'm talking about the center left, Democratic Party in the United States, the New Labour in Britain, and the Socialists and the SPD in France and Germany. They had positioned themselves more or less as the boosters or the cheerleaders of a particular model of globalism. They were pushing for trade agreements, for financial liberalization, for financial globalization. And so they have been tainted by close association with many of the globalist arrangements, which have created divisions in society and has become now delegitimized, and is fueling, they're fueling this populist backlash. So I think it's partly that the left has not yet come up with new ideas, but it's also partly that they've been caught in the wrong position, that they're tainted with close association with the many policies that are actually at the source of the problem. Well, global governance sounds very, nice, but the reality of it is that global governance is basically a bunch of technocratic elites and professional, skilled, highly skilled people and large corporations and investors who are essentially designing the rules. So in that global governance, you are not going to find many trade unionists. You're not going to find many environmental groups. You're not going to find many consumer groups. You're not going to find many civil society organizations. Now there is, organizations like the WTO will make lip service and they'll do some outreach and so forth. But the fact is that when we talk about global governance, we're talking about really highly technocratic arrangements that often are captured by moneyed interests. This is not an adequate substitute for transparent, representative, politically legitimized processes which democracies are entitled to. This is an area where economic policy has been, prone to fads. That state intervention is good, state intervention is bad, and we move. It seems like the pendulum keeps moving from one end to the other. And I don't find, ideological discussions about, is industrial policy good, is industrial policy bad, should the government intervene or not. Those discussions, are not very helpful in the abstract. I think all successful countries, in fact, have had very pragmatic governments that have intervened and that have worked with their private sectors to foster structural transformation, to foster innovation, to foster productivity-enhancing change. This is true even of countries that seem like the most wedded to the classical liberal notion of no government intervention. In the United States today, we have many, many programs of the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, that subsidize and stimulate new industries, high technology industries, green technologies. And so even in the United States, you don't have an explicit ideology of the government as a implementer of industrial policy. The reality is that under the surface, there are a lot of such programs, and that those programs always have played a very important role at every stage of American economic development in fostering new industries. That was true of Silicon Valley, which was stimulated by U.S. policies with respect to credit and small business supports. And it was clearly, in the case of aerospace and other industries, that was subsidized by the Department of Defense. And certainly true of everything today in terms of automated vehicles, where the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, DARPA, in the United States has played a very big role, a government agency. So I think, so we should get away from sort of this, very old and stale debate about whether the government should be doing this or not, and instead sort of turn it around and say, okay, what kinds of government collaboration with the private sector work, which kinds don't? Let's do more of the kinds that work, and let's do less of the kinds that don't work. And I think that's the right attitude with which to approach this topic. I'm a believer in the power of the state to achieve desirable economic objectives, in this case, structural transformation. I think there's a common problem now that plagues all countries in the world, and which requires significant thinking and creative action by the governments. And this is that there is a significant technological bifurcation of economies like Spain, where you have certain firms that are global champions, that are highly productive, pay very high wages, they are fully integrated in global value chains, and they are indistinguishable from the best firms in Germany or the United States. And then you have large parts of the economy that operate under much lower productivity conditions, much lower wages, where labor and employment is much more precarious based on temporary contracts. So the critical challenge is to reintegrate domestic economies, make sure that these highly productive firms, these champions, are integrated much better with their local economies, that they can invest in their local environment, that they train more local workers, that they transfer some of their technology to their suppliers, so that their technological advantages are disseminated throughout the rest of Spanish society. Now, there is no single instrument that is going to enable the government to do this. But what I think might work, and has a chance of working, is a process of dialogue that asks these firms, what are the obstacles? Why are they not growing? Why are they not absorbing? Why they don't have more local suppliers? What are the obstacles that prevent them from disseminating some of the benefits of the knowledge economy in which they participate to broader segments of suppliers and others with which they interact? And so I think there the state can be a very active sort of coordinator and enabler to ensure that these opportunities are more broadly shared by essentially entering into a kind of an implicit contract with these top firms, which is to say, I'm going to try to help you as much as I can by providing you with a good business environment, not subsidies, but good business environment, and ensuring that the regulatory and business environment is conducive to your prosperity. But in return, I expect you to do things for your local community, for the local workforce, for your suppliers as well. And let's see what the terms of that exchange can be.